we are back for some more creepypastas. So today we're going to be reading about the Puppeteer, and once again, this is not my story. This is by Lady Mary Evangeline, which I guess credit to you. There's two parts to this, so I'll read both parts because it's short. And yeah, let's get right into it. I had this doll for quite a while now. It was a beautiful porcelain doll. You know, the way that most porcelain dolls look like. I was just like that. Wavy, long blonde curls, black eyes, a beautiful pink and red dress with a typical headband with lace around the edges. It was a doll I received from my mother at an early age. At that age, I was always thought it was such a pretty doll, a perfect look. My grandmother had almost 50 dolls of that kind, all of them beautiful, perfect porcelain dolls. But this one in particular, the blonde with the red dress, I always remember. But this is the one that would be the death of me. I lived alone for quite a while now, I had just gotten to college, seeing my whole life lay in front of me, and all I had to do was just go out and pick out what I wanted. Easy as that. I was aiming for psychology, a subject that I had started to respect and enjoy the last 3 years. Seeing as my mother was a nurse and my dad was a therapist, it was the obvious choice for me. But moving so far away from my family and friends wasn't easy as I thought. Sure, my roommate was a nice person, but maybe not as chatty as I would hoped to. I wasn't a person to just sit quiet in my room and never speak until I had to. I enjoyed getting out, seeing friends, but I didn't have any time or friends around. No one would talk to me unless I wanted help from my teacher in school or my roommate had forgotten to buy milk. It was lonely to say the least. Homework was the only thing to keep me distracted from feeling lonely. I didn't have time to even make friends. Friends was a silly thing after all. I didn't have the time to go and party, maybe find somebody. It was worthless either way, and my dad would skin me alive if I didn't keep my focus on the schoolwork. The only thing I had brought from my home to remind me of my family was that doll. The girlish toy was displayed on the desk in front of my bed, smiling against me when I needed someone to talk to or just watch over me as I slept. It was me and that doll the whole time. That fucking ugly doll. As time went on, I started to pull myself more and more away from the human contact as possible. The schoolwork was getting over my head, and the regret of going here began filling my head. But I couldn't quit now and go home, not after my parents had paid for everything from my college and car to get here. I just had to stay and make the best out of it. I really tried hard, but with each day the hatred of other people took the hold of me, and I would need hours alone, just sitting in my room to cool off. It was getting harder to get out each day. My roommate despised me, I could tell, but I didn't blame her. I was acting like a jerk. I refused to take my share of the daily chores, wiping the floors, taking out the trash, but I couldn't do it. I was being pulled into a dark hole. And with that loneliness came the paranoia. At first I accepted being lonely, but it had reached a point to where I started to realize my dumb behavior, trying to reach out to people among to tell them I wasn't feeling alright. There was only stress and nobody had time to talk to a stupid college student. It was only my nerves. I hoped it was. I locked myself in the room and I couldn't go out anymore. I had to send in to my teachers to cancel the classes day after day, but it didn't matter. They didn't send anything in search for me, so I just kept spinning in my room week out and week in. It was an evil cycle I couldn't get out of. Then it happened. My room had been a cage. I wouldn't eat, couldn't even reach to the point where my roommate would come and knock on my door to see if everything was okay. But I didn't open up. I just yelled back in reply that she would go away, and she did. She didn't care enough to make a second attempt. She never knocked on my door again, and it was just me and my doll watching over me every breath I took. Then there was that night. This night, actually. It was the night that I was so used to spending alone, I didn't even bother to try turning on the lights as I stepped from my bed and pulled on a sweater and a pair of untied Converse before I made my way out of my room in so many days. I needed the fresh air and my window was broken, unable to open up. It was in the middle of the night, maybe even morning. It was still so dark outside, so I just assumed it was still night even though I hadn't checked the time yet, and I couldn't care less. Anyway, it was a pain in the ass to come out of my room and not wake my stupid roommate up. All I needed was to get out for a minute or two and gather some air, maybe go out and buy some cigarettes. I promised myself to stop smoking, but lately that was the only thing I'd been doing smoking. I only snuck out late at night to go and get me some new cigs. It was a bad thing, I knew, but it was the only thing to keep me going and kept me awake and safe. But that particular night, there was something strange. Someone had unlocked the gate out to the street. It hadn't happened before, and I thought the landlord held a hard hand to keep it locked at all times. I didn't bother. I just pushed the little red box out of the pocket and started smoking. The good thing about the night was there was no one around, no one to annoy me with their stupid voices. It was quiet, maybe just a car driving by, but then, no more than that, it was peaceful. A few minutes after gaining some cold on my warm skin and some smoke inside my lungs, I decided to go back and maybe try to watch some television. Nothing good aired at night, but it was always worth a try. I stepped back into the building and shrugged the last bit of unwanted cold off, making myself ready to sneak back into my room. But as soon as I came to the staircase, there was something in the way, or someone standing by the stairs. I had to admit, it did scare me to some point, but a second later I was back in my not give a single fuck state and tried to walk up the stairs without confronting the person standing in the way. At first I thought it was my roommate, but the shadow of the person was too manly, too big to be the petite roommate that I knew. I tried to pass the odd stranger and just slightly bumped my elbow into him, but he didn't move or speak. He just stood there. It was creeping me out, and the scenario was too freaky. But of course, there was some other students in the apartment just waiting to scare the shit out of some people, some other poor first year students, but I wasn't one to be fooled. But I didn't stop. But I didn't stop until I heard a sound. It was one of those sounds where it just caused your concentration to break shut. It was distracting, scary, unnerving. I couldn't continue on, so I just froze in the position and turned around to face him. At first there was a cracking sound. The sound had startled me. Then there was sobbing. A young man's voice of sobbing. But it wasn't human. Yeah. Maybe to some degree, but the voice was pitching up, like it was breaking through some bad static television screen. I stood for a few I stood only a few steps away from the man in the shadow. I wanted to break away from my sudden frozen state of mind, but I couldn't. I was stuck, like my feet had been nailed to the stairs. I was trying to speak, but he spoke before I had the chance to. It was getting clearer to see now, since spending some time in the darkness helped the vision clear up. He was wearing some kind of jacket, black, everything black, sewn cap with strings falling out of the hole in the back, also black. His hair was torn but long, like he hadn't been able to cut it for a while, or showered it. His appearance was etching inside my mind, but his voice appeared like daggers in my ears. When he spoke, he made off another static noise like a broken radio, but he spoke in words. He tried to calm me down, but I was already too scared to bring myself to relax. You're alone here, aren't you? I swallowed hard. The thought of somebody spying on me this entire time was filling my head like urging vomit, feeling disgusted by this man and his voice. I just shook my head, no response. Couldn't give him a reply. I should have. Maybe it had changed the whole situation for the better. Maybe I hadn't been here now, scared for my life. But I was, and all I knew, he knew that as well. But when I didn't give him the answer he expected, he turned to me, and his sight was one of the most terrifying yet fascinating faces I had ever seen. He wasn't scarred or wounded in any way to make me feel uncomfortable by his appearance, but his eyes and his mouth. There was a weird glow, a golden orange glow. It filled both his eyeballs and his mouth, and his teeth shining through in a bright yellow light. It glowed in the dark, and it cast a light across us, on the stairs, the floor, and on me. And I could see him smirk on his gray-painted face, and that's when I snapped. It wasn't human, and I had to get away from there. I broke through the invisible bonds and threw myself up the stairs, running up quickly as my untied shoes slammed against the wooden floor. I fled to my room without any second thought, and hopefully my roommate and I had been ignoring him for so many weeks would hear me and call the police. I closed the door after me and locked it, my stumbling feet bringing me across the floor and into the desk, knocking my precious family doll on the floor. The porcelain broke, and I gasped in a panic, trying to recollect myself and my thoughts. There was no more noise after I slammed the door to my room, no roommate coming after me, no weird glowing man in the stairwell, just me and my broken doll, lying on the floor. I tried to scream or cry or call for any help at all. It wasn't real. I had become too crazy, insane. After spending so many months just being alone, this is what happened. I was lying on the floor, broken and shattered in pieces, and I didn't know what to believe. I didn't fall asleep. I sat on the floor, pacing back and forth by crawling the best I could. The cigarette from before now just sat like a needle in my throat now. I was thirsty, but I couldn't move out to the kitchen to get something to drink. Maybe he was still there, still waiting for me to come out. But I wasn't moving out of my spot. I never did. An hour of complete silence in the room began to calm down and stand up to try and calm myself down. There was still that feeling of being watched, and I knew that feeling all too well. The feeling of being paranoid and lonely all came down to this a breakdown. Once I remembered the doll being broken, I immediately started to try and patch it together. It was like the only thing I had in focus my best friend, the doll. I managed to get a needle and thread in my room and some glue to get the doll back to its former glory. But it wasn't easy. No matter how hard I tried, the doll just would fall back together. It became an endless attempt of nothing, and I tried again and again, but it just would fall to pieces. My only friend. I became too tired and suddenly panicking and fixing the doll, I just passed out on my bed. But I curled up together in a ball with a blanket over my head, somehow imagining that no monster under my bed would reach me now, and all I wanted to do was sleep. I didn't know he would come back. This time it was different, however. This time I welcomed it. I was tired of running all the time, and I would rather die in my sleep than face another day of being lonely again. And now with my only friend broken, what was I supposed to do? It was tiring, and the only way he approached me this time, it was like I was asleep but still could control my body, like a lucid dream. But I wouldn't dare step into another day. Tonight it would end, just like I had been afraid that it would. But I didn't care anymore. I didn't bother. I just wanted to have a long sleep and never wake up again. Never face the loneliness again. He came back to me, with his hands guiding me from my bed. He wrapped his mind around mine as I tried to see. But the only thing I could see was his gray hands, holding mine tight. But suddenly, there was a sensation I wasn't sure I could feel, of floating. Like a puppet, he cut two open cuts on my wrists, but it wasn't across. It was more like in the center of my arm and down, and he reached for something. Muscle. Something to peel out and hung on to. The bad thing was, I allowed him to do it. My struggle had become too much to bear, and with the long pieces of muscle hanging out of the cuts on my wrist, he started to pull at them. He pulled at them like he wanted to control my body and arms, how it all came together in a reaction of my nervous system and skeleton. He knew how it worked. Yet there was no pain that filled my heart or body, just another peace of mind staying at ease again. It was a wonderful feeling. It was like nothing else mattered, and as he continued to cut me open, he began singing. They call me the puppeteer, my fingers are thin, and my hands are stained with tears, for the puppets I steer with my strings and dreams. Now I could see him clearer. The man who I just hated with all of my might, I now welcomed to finish off my endless suffering. Maybe it had been he who had forced me into this thinking. Maybe he was the one who blamed for everything I had done to myself. Was this all in my head, or was this real? They called me the puppeteer. I had no friends like you. First, nobody saw the value of my friendship, but in the end, they all became my friends, with strings and dreams. It took me only a minute to lose every sense of my touch. My nervous system had been crushed under the hand of this man, this thing, breaking every bone in my body. I could feel he's twisting my ribs and twisting the hip bones, all to make it easier for him to turn him into what he saw me fitting to be. It was like the long pieces of torn muscle was strained, controlling my limbs and my back and my head flailing from side to side. All I could see was his smile, so I smiled back. They call me the puppeteer, my body dark and my eyes hunger of gold. In my eyes no one is alone, and with the strings in my dreams you should be my friend too. The last feeling I could feel was his hand tugging around my neck, then snap. At first I was afraid to see death approaching me this way. I had never thought of it this way. I would have said no and refused if I could decide it all on my own, but I didn't. I said yes. With a broken neck, death was just half a second away. Then there was nothing but a golden smile and his warm hands holding the strings as my body fell. Early in the morning, my roommate found me dead. I had committed suicide by hanging myself in the fan ceiling, assuring my death. I jumped from the bed, and beside me was that doll, the broken porcelain doll with the red dress and lovely blonde hair. You may be wondering how I'm writing this to you now, or how I found my way to contact you. I found it necessary to write down my story before I passed on. This is my legacy. This is what I'm leaving behind. I couldn't stand the loneliness anymore, and I couldn't stand facing my problems on my own. So it took so long, too long. Dear mom and dad, I'm so sorry. Part two, which is, I think, a different story, but the same person, so I'm just going to read it anyways. Shouldn't be too long either. It all began when I started to notice quick changes in my mother. No, it began way earlier than that when I really think about it. Years. Maybe even before I could remember the difference between right and wrong, which is a pretty long time ago. I'd always been the one of two brothers in my family. Our mother was single, and she'd always had been ever since I could remember. Our father had bailed out on us when the news about me had arrived. We loved our mother, we really did. She brought us nice clothes, and even though she couldn't afford it, providing necessary food and making a good home for us. Everything was great. My mom had some issues with drinking. It wasn't just a problem, it was a big problem. She stayed single even though she tried to meet others. It would always go well in the beginning until she would change her mind and show the next man out the door. Always the same story with her. I felt very alone. My brother wasn't very interested in playing with me. Seeing he was about 5 years older, and he always thought of me as the annoying little sibling. But all I wanted was company. I didn't find any success in making friends in school or during my spare time. I just spent every moment alone. My mom didn't care, of course. She was too busy trying to finish up her work so she could spend the last hours at home drinking her evenings away. But I guess every single second of loneliness brought something out of me. I started to daydream a lot. Making imaginary friends was one of my favorite hobbies. Yes, a hobby. I made new ones so often it was hard to even keep up, even for me. You see, there was this particular imaginary friend. He wasn't like the others. This was the only one who gave me more peace than anything. He played with me, of course, but he only came around nighttime. Then we'd talk and fool around, making super sure my mom didn't hear my cheerful giggling. He was an expert on many things, but he was best at crafting and making me puppets. Every day he'd turn up with a new doll in any design I wanted to be. That was his thing, the puppet man. I always just managed to escape the fact that I had imaginary friends, but with him, it was hard to deny he was actually there, because I knew he was. Every night when he said I had to sleep, he stood for another hour just to make sure that I was actually falling asleep. His golden, glowing eyes observing me from afar in the darkness, I'd stare back at him. His grey face was keeping me calm as he kept smiling towards me. I fell asleep every night. But I couldn't talk to him about this creature visiting me every night. It was odd. Time went on as it should have. I grew up, and so did my brother. Only thing that seemed to stay the same was my mother's drinking habits. My brother moved out around the age of 18. He couldn't put up with her anymore. I was only 12 at the time, and I wouldn't get out of the home for a long, long time. I was waiting patiently, though. I suppose that was the only thing I could do, being so alone. My imaginary friend never left, however, and it became a problem. He continued to visit me every single evening, keeping me company, and I started to ignore him. I was mad. Had to be. At 12 years old, the whole imaginary friend deal was ridiculous. I had other things to do anyways. Homework, playing on my PlayStation 2. I was content. Not happy, just neutral. I didn't feel lonely. I left that thought a long time ago. Yet, there he was, staring at me with his face hidden beneath the shadows of my room, glowing eyes studying me. Another year passed, and no success. I eventually got tired of everything. School was being a downer, and my mom got worse with her drinking, even to the point to where she started to self-harm. She refused to talk to me even when I tried to. She lost her job eventually. It was something I'd wanted to see for a long time, and it always seemed like something that might help her realize she had a problem. But nope. After my mom wouldn't do anything but sit there, drinking all her problems away, she became angry with time, and everyone noticed. Everyone who was, well, me. I did everything I could not to stay at home, sleeping over at my aunt's place or even trying to contact my brother. But there was a certain night I had to stay at home, and it was hell on earth. Every single day she would scold me for nothing. It was such a stupid, simple thing. Forgetting to buy milk on the way home, forgetting to cook dinner. What could I do? I was 13. My mother couldn't even tell me how sorry she was. She just kept on. And one night, she lost it. And I remember it clearly. It was something about the dishes. I had to clean after dinner, like always, and this time I accidentally dropped a plate. It fell to the floor, hitting hard, and shattered into tiny pieces. My mother, of course, was furious with me. I couldn't understand her at some point, didn't get why she was upset with me, but now I blamed her for everything that happened. But this time she didn't just scream in my face for a minute or two. This time she was acting up violently, throwing a chair across the room. She screamed at me for not being the perfect son, how she lost everything because of me and my brother. Everything was our fault. A slap to the face, and then she was done. I ran up and locked myself in my room, and there he was waiting for me. It was the evening, after all. For the first time in almost 2 years I spoke to him. He was the only soul I could talk to. Even though he was imaginary, and even though I was basically talking to myself, I didn't care. I desperately needed it. And for the first time he spoke to me. He was more calm than I thought he'd be. Your mom. She's evil. I disagreed. She wasn't evil. Or was she? She'd ruined my life, she'd hated me, but I still shook my head. Don't cry, he spoke to me. Big boys don't cry. So calm down. I'll go talk to your mom. Now go to sleep. You need it. I did as he said, no questions, and I went to bed. My heart was pounding and my head was spinning. My mom never checked up on me. She would probably leave anyway. The only thing that she ever did, giving up on us, on everything, on life. It didn't take me long to fall asleep that night, and in the morning I would just return to school like nothing had happened and find my same pathetic alcoholic mother the next day. But there was never meant to be another day. I woke up again, and it was completely dark around me. The apartment had been lost of all its power. I didn't wake up all by myself, though. There was some kind of noise outside of my bedroom, warily and insecure. I stepped up from my bed and moved out to the hall. It was a cracking noise, like someone stepping on ice or broken glass, but it was far more dull than that. My curiosity took over, and I continued until I found the source of the breaking and snapping sound. It was my mother's bedroom. What was going on in there? My mother was supposed to be sleeping at this hour. I came closer, and the noise appeared louder. After a minute of listening outside of the room, I decided to go in. I pushed the one door and stumbled to my knees. What I saw, no one was supposed to see such a thing. My mom had been thrown towards the floor, her face was bloody, and her nose seemed broken. She was kneeling down with her arms extended backwards in an unnatural position, hands cramping out of pain. She looked like she was screaming, but only coughed out, wheezing hard. When she saw me, that's when I lost it. I tried to scream, but I couldn't. I only crawled up towards the bedside, clutching onto it like it was the only thing that tried to save me at this point. My mother's arms were breaking in front of my face, by something I couldn't see or hear. I could only see her, my mother, scared for her life. And then he slowly appeared before me, his gray hands and face emerging from the shadows. His golden eyes were completely focused on her, and then I could see what he was doing. With one foot on her back, his fingertips swept golden threads that had tied themselves to her arms. He was breaking my mother's arms in two. The puppet man. Then her bones wouldn't hold any more, and they eventually broke, snapping in horrible trail sounds. I tried to scream again, but everything was once again muted by my own fright. I tried to calm down, tried to realize I was only imagining everything, but it was real. My own friend, imaginary friend, was killing my mom, and I did nothing to stop him. He wasn't pleased. I tried to call him, tried to beg him to stop, but he just wouldn't listen. He only continued to hurt my mother further. He'd take his time, and it seemed to slowly break every bone in her body, and he forced me to sit there. He made me watch as he broke my mother apart. He told me he was getting rid of the evil. I wanted to believe him, but I just couldn't. He broke her legs, ribs, even fingers, bones turning in every direction they shouldn't. I screamed and I screamed. No one heard me. His golden eyes turned to look at me as he hushed me one final time. Then he strangled her. Beautiful golden glow strings wrapped around her neck, squeezing out of the last glimpse of life I could see in my mother's eyes. It was the last thing I could remember before it went dark, and I passed out on the floor by the bedside. Our neighbors had heard my screaming and called the police. Everyone pitied the orphan who had seen his mother die in front of his eyes, but according to them, my mother hadn't been murdered. She had been found in the middle of the room with a noose around her neck. The rope had been able to carry her body after a while and had been burst in two, causing my mother's corpse to fall on the floor. I never spoke about her death ever again, neither did I say another word about my imaginary friend. Maybe it had all been a horrible dream, and he was always just in my head. Even at my mother's funeral I was completely alone. My brother didn't even bother showing up. Only my aunt and uncle was there. Everyone saw this coming somehow. Everyone but me. And I spent hours waiting for him to come pick me up. The only one who had listened to me all this time. Held me company, comforted me when I needed the most. And when I was standing alone by her coffin, suddenly I felt someone grabbing my hand. And I smiled, his gray hand on my shoulder. I never thought you'd come back. Yikes. That would be a bad way to go. Anyways, I hope you all enjoyed this one. You know what to do. Everything's down in the description. I love you guys, and I will see you guys later. Bye bye.